The slap echoed through the first-class cabin. "If you can't follow instructions, you don't belong here," the flight attendant Veronica hissed. She saw a 17-year-old black teen in a hoodie, causing a scene not Jamal Washington, who was in the middle of a serious asthma attack. She was oblivious that the man watching from the adjacent seat, his face a mask of cold fury, was Jamal's father, Elijah Washington, the billionaire CEO, whose company was in the final stages of acquiring this very airline. Veronica thought she was asserting authority. She had actually just ended her career. The morning began like any other for the Washington family, though ordinary for them, looked different than for most. Elijah Washington, founder and CEO of Quantum Innovations, had built a tech empire worth $23 billion from nothing. At 48, he carried himself with the poised confidence of someone accustomed to commanding rooms and closing deals that changed industries. Today, however, his attention focused solely on his son and their journey to San Francisco. "Jamal, we need to leave in 10 minutes. Elijah called up the curved staircase of their Boston mansion. His voice echoed against marble floors and museum-quality art pieces that chronicled black excellence throughout history. 17-year-old Jamal Washington stood in his bedroom, staring at his reflection in the full-length mirror. Harvard acceptance letter on his desk. Perfect SAT scores. National Merit Scholar. Yet the face looking back at him seemed disconnected from these accomplishments. He adjusted his designer blazer inside. "Coming?" He answered, grabbing his backpack filled not with the tech conference materials his father had provided, but with music composition notebooks and headphones. In the sleek black Maybach headed toward Logan International Airport, tension filled the space between father and son. "This conference is important, Jamal. You'll meet people who can mentor you when you start at Harvard next fall." Jamal stared out the window. "Did you ever consider that maybe I don't want to follow in your footsteps? That maybe coding and venture capital aren't my passion?" Elijah's jaw tightened. Since losing his wife Illa to cancer 3 years ago, he'd thrown himself into grooming Jamal for success the only way he knew how. "Your music is a wonderful hobby, son, but the Washington name now means something in this world. With that comes responsibility. Responsibility to what pretend racism doesn't exist, because we have money." "Act like people don't still see the color of our skin first," Jamal challenged. "I've never said to ignore racism," Elijah responded carefully. "I've taught you to rise above it strategically, to succeed despite it. That's how real change happens." Their philosophical divide remained unresolved as they reached the airport. A conversation they'd had countless times since Layla's passing had left them to navigate their relationship alone. At Logan International, the first hints of what the day would bring appeared at security. Despite their first-class tickets and elite status, a TSA agent waved Jamal aside for random additional screening, while white businessmen in similar attire passed through unhindered. "Sir, we need to check your bag," the agent said to Jamal without making eye contact. Elijah watched his face, a practiced mask of calm that betrayed nothing, though his hand gripped his leather briefcase slightly tighter. Jamal caught his father's subtle headshake, a silent instruction to comply without complaint. 20 minutes later, after Jamal's belongings had been thoroughly searched and he'd been patted down, they continued toward their gate. Third time this year, Jamal muttered, "Did you see? They didn't stop anyone else." "I saw," Elijah said quietly. "But we made our flight and now it's behind us." "That's always your answer," Jamal said. "Put your head down. Don't make waves. Just keep accumulating wealth and power, and maybe one day they'll see us as equals." "No," Elijah corrected. "My answer is, choose your battles wisely." That's how I built everything we have. When they reached the gate for first-class boarding, the gate agent smiled warmly at the passengers ahead of them, an older white couple, who received compliments on their destination choice. When Elijah and Jamal approached, her smile vanished, replaced by a scrutinizing gaze. "Boarding passes and ID, please," she stated flatly, examining their documents with exaggerated thoroughness before reluctantly waving them through. As they entered the jet bridge, Elijah placed a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. "Remember who you are," he said softly. "Remember who we are." Flight attendant Veronica Miller stood at the aircraft entrance, blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, welcoming passengers with practiced hospitality. Her smile, however, noticeably dimmed when the Washingtons approached. "Seats?" she asked curtly, without the "sir" she'd attached to her greeting for previous passengers. "2A and 2B, Elijah replied pleasantly. Veronica's eyebrows raised slightly in apparent surprise at their first-class seats, but said nothing as she gestured vaguely toward the cabin. As they settled into their leather seats, Jamal noticed the stares. A white businessman in his 50s across the aisle looked at them, then checked his seat number as if making sure he hadn't accidentally boarded the wrong flight. An older woman clutched her purse tighter as Jamal passed. These were familiar experiences for which Jamal had developed an emotional callus, but today each slight felt rawer than usual. Water or champagne before takeoff? Veronica asked the passengers in 1A and 1B, a white couple who appeared to be in their 60s. When she turned to the Washingtons, she simply said, "Drinks," without making eye contact, already half turned away, as if anticipating a quick transaction. "Water would be fine, thank you," Elijah said. "Same," Jamal added. Veronica returned moments later, placing glasses carefully on the white couple's tray tables with a napkin underneath. "For the Washingtons?" She set the water down, hastily spilling a few drops on Elijah's sleeve. "Sorry," she said, without sincerity, already moving away. "Let it go," Elijah whispered as he saw Jamal's fists clench. "It's a 3-hour flight. Not worth it." Jamal turned to look out the window, his reflection in the glass showing the internal battle between his father's approach to navigating a world built on systemic racism and his own growing conviction that silence perpetuated injustice. Neither of them could have predicted how much worse things would get once they were airborne, or how the day would transform both their lives and their relationship forever. At $30,000 FT above the Midwest, Jamal Washington watched as flight attendant Veronica Miller worked her way through the first-class cabin. She offered warm towels to each passenger, exchanging pleasant conversation with everyone she served. Everyone except the Washingtons. When she reached their row, she wordlessly dropped the towels on their tray tables and continued on without meeting their eyes. Elijah Washington merely unfolded his towel and wiped his hands as if nothing were amiss. But Jamal felt his temperature rising. "Did you see that?" he whispered to his father. "Focus on why we're going to San Francisco," Elijah replied, opening his laptop. "I need your thoughts on the presentation slides before tomorrow." An hour into the flight, Veronica pushed the beverage cart down the aisle, taking drink orders. Her smile was radiant as she chatted with the passengers in the first row. "How's your daughter enjoying Princeton?" she asked the white businessmen in 1A, clearly remembering details from their boarding conversation. When she reached the Washingtons, her demeanor shifted entirely. "Drinks?" she asked flatly. "I'll have cranberry juice, please," Jamal said. "Orange juice," Elijah requested. Veronica served the passenger across the aisle first, carefully pouring his requested scotch and adding a small bowl of warmed nut she hadn't offered to the Washingtons. When she finally turned to serve Jamal, her movements became jerky and rushed. As she extended the plastic cup, she accidentally tilted it, sending cranberry juice cascading onto Jamal's open laptop. "Oh!" she exclaimed with exaggerated surprise that didn't reach her eyes. No apology followed. Jamal jumped up as the liquid seeped between his keyboard keys, the screen already flickering. The laptop contained months of music compositions he'd been working on. "Oh, what the hell?" he exclaimed, grabbing for napkins. Veronica tossed a handful of cocktail napkins his way, without a word, and continued serving drinks as if nothing significant had happened. The laptop, a $3,500 machine, sputtered and died. "That was deliberate," Jamal hissed to his father. "You saw it." Elijah's expression remained impassive, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. "We'll get you a new computer in San Francisco. That's not the point." Jamal said loud enough that several passengers turned to look. "All my work was on there. She did that on purpose, and you're just going to let it slide." The incident triggered memories Jamal couldn't suppress. Last year at Westlake Preparatory Academy, where he was one of only 12 black students, he'd scored perfect marks on an advanced calculus exam. His teacher had accused him of cheating, unable to believe he could legitimately outperform his white peers. Despite his impeccable academic record, Jamal had been forced to retake the test under supervision, while his white classmates' identical scores went unquestioned. Then there was the time police had stopped him while he was driving his father's Tesla. The officers had approached with hands on their weapons, demanding to know whose car he was really driving. Only his father's remote video intervention through the car's security system had de-escalated the situation. Through each incident, Elijah had advised patience, strategic responses, documentation, never confrontation. Pick your battles, he always said. Build power first, then use it wisely. But sitting on this plane with sticky juice destroying his creative work, while the perpetrator served drinks with impunity, just rows away, Jamal felt his father's approach failing him. The accumulated weight of 1,000 indignities pressed on his chest. Across the aisle, a black man in his 40s observed the scene with growing concern. Andre Coleman, executive vice president at a Fortune 500 company, recognized the dynamics at play immediately. He'd experienced similar treatment countless times despite his expensive suit and executive status. He caught Elijah's eye and gave a subtle nod of solidarity. 2 rows behind them, Sophia Chen, a 32-year-old Asian American tech entrepreneur, had witnessed everything. She discreetly positioned her phone to record Veronica's interactions with various passengers, documenting the stark difference in treatment. Meanwhile, from seat 3C, Bradley Pierce, a middle-aged white man with an investment banking pedigree, made little effort to hide his disdain. Looks like someone's affirmative action ticket isn't buying the service they expected, he muttered to his seatmate, just loud enough for Jamal to hear. Elijah placed a restraining hand on his son's arm as Jamal started to turn around. Not now, he whispered. Not here. When then, Dad? Jamal challenged, keeping his voice low but intense. At what point is enough when we reach some magical level of success where racism suddenly disappears? You're literally one of the richest men in America, and look how they're treating us. Elijah leaned close to his son's ear. I've requested to speak with the captain after we reach cruising altitude. Trust me, son. There are effective ways to address this that won't end with us being removed from the flight or worse. Jamal slumped back in his seat, unconvinced. His father had arranged a brief conversation with Captain Richard Sullivan during a bathroom break, but Jamal had observed the dismissive way the captain had listened to his father's concerns about their treatment. I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding, the captain had said. Veronica is one of our most experienced flight attendants. I'll speak with her, but I'm certain she's providing standard service to all passengers. The captain's response had been so predictable that Jamal could have written the script himself. Another authority figure closing ranks. Another system protecting its own while gaslighting those who dared to question their treatment. As Veronica continued her passive-aggressive service throughout the cabin, the divide between father and son widened. Elijah's practiced restraint versus Jamal's raw indignation represented not just 2 temperaments, but 2 generations' approaches to confronting racism. One shaped by hard-learned caution, the other fueled by an urgent demand for immediate justice. Neither could have anticipated how dramatically those philosophies would be tested before they reached their destination. Have you ever witnessed a moment when someone's true character is revealed in an instant? The kind of moment that separates those who stand up for what's right from those who look away. Comment number 1. If you believe silence in the face of discrimination makes you complicit. Hit like if you've ever had to choose between speaking up or staying safe. Let's see how Jamal's choice unfolds when pushed to his breaking point. 90 minutes into the flight, Jamal Washington felt his chest tightening. The familiar constriction in his airways signaled the onset of an asthma attack. Not severe yet, but concerning enough that he needed his medication. The stress from the laptop incident and ongoing hostile treatment had likely triggered it. Dad, he whispered to Elijah, I need my inhaler from my backpack. Elijah immediately pressed the call button above his seat. After several minutes with no response, he pressed it again. Across the aisle, Bradley Pierce received immediate attention when his button lit up moments later. Finally, after the third attempt, Veronica approached their seats with visible reluctance. "Yes," she asked, addressing the space between them rather than either Washington directly. "My son needs his medication from the overhead compartment," Elijah explained calmly. "Could you please assist us or allow him to retrieve his bag?" Veronica glanced at Jamal, who was now taking measured breaths to control his increasingly labored breathing. "We're experiencing turbulence," she stated flatly, despite the fact that the seatbelt sign was off and the flight was perfectly smooth. No one should be out of their seats right now. As if to contradict her statement, two white passengers from the middle section of first class stood up and walked to the bathroom without Veronica saying a word. "As you can see," Elijah pointed out with strained patience, "other passengers are moving about the cabin. My son needs his asthma medication. It's a medical necessity." "I'll return when it's safe," Veronica replied, walking away without further acknowledgement. 10 minutes passed. Jamal's breathing became more labored, his inhales now producing a slight whiss audible to his father. Elijah pressed the call button again, his composed facade beginning to crack. A different flight attendant appeared. This time, a younger woman named Taylor, who seemed confused when Elijah explained the situation. "I don't understand why this would be an issue," she said. "Let me get your bag down for you." Before she could help, Veronica materialized beside her, whispering something that made Taylor's expression change. Taylor retreated with an apologetic glance, and Veronica once again stated that no one was permitted out of their seats. Across the aisle, Andre Coleman had observed enough. "Excuse me," he interjected, "but that young man clearly needs medical attention. There's no turbulence, and you've allowed other passengers to move freely. Sir, please mind your own business." Veronica snapped her veneer of professionalism slipping. Jamal's condition was worsening. His breathing became more audible, and a sheen of sweat appeared on his forehead as he struggled to maintain normal oxygen levels. "This is ridiculous," Elijah finally said, his voice taking on an edge that Jamal rarely heard. "My son needs his medication now. Either provide assistance immediately, or I will get it myself. You need to control yourself, sir." Veronica responded, her emphasis on "sir" dripping with sarcasm. "If you can't follow crew instructions, we'll have other issues to address." The implied threat hung in the air. Jamal recognized it for what it was. The same threat black people had faced throughout history when asserting their basic rights. Comply or face consequences. Accept mistreatment or risk something worse. In that moment, something shifted in Jamal. Through his increasingly difficult breathing, a clarity emerged. He would not let his father face this alone. He would not be another young black man who accepted injustice to avoid conflict. With deliberate movements, Jamal unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up. "Sir, sit down immediately." Veronica commanded, her voice rising. "I need my inhaler." Jamal stated simply, his voice raspy but determined. "I can't breathe well, and you've refused to help for over 15 minutes now. If you don't sit down right now, I'll have the captain divert this flight. And have you removed?" Veronica threatened. Sophia Chen, still recording, discreetly captured the entire exchange. Bradley Pierce and several other passengers watched with varying expressions. Some concerned, others seemingly entertained by the confrontation. "I'm getting my medication," Jamal insisted, taking a step toward the overhead bin. What happened next occurred so quickly that passengers would later give conflicting accounts. Veronica stepped into Jamal's path and placed her hands on his chest, pushing him backward with surprising force. As Jamal stumbled slightly instinctively, raising his hands in a non-threatening gesture to maintain balance. Veronica's right hand swung upward and connected with his face in a resounding slap that snapped his head to the side. The sound echoed through the suddenly silent cabin. A trickle of blood appeared at the corner of Jamal's lip, where Veronica's ring had cut him. He stood frozen, his hand rising slowly to touch the spot in disbelief. The entire first-class cabin went still. Even breathing seemed too loud in the shocked silence that followed. Elijah Washington rose to his full height, his expression transforming into something that made Veronica take an involuntary step backward. There was no anger visible on his face. Something far more terrifying had replaced it. The cold, calculating look of a man who had built and destroyed billion-dollar companies, who had overcome systemic barriers through sheer force of will, who had just watched his child being assaulted. Without a word, he reached over and pressed the call button once deliberately. Seconds later, the plane's intercom crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're experiencing a situation that requires us to return to the gate. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We'll provide more information shortly." The aircraft, which had been cruising smoothly towards San Francisco, banked in a gentle turn. Within minutes, they could feel the descent beginning, as the plane headed back to the airport it had departed from less than 2 hours earlier. Jamal stood transfixed, blood on his lip breath, coming in increasingly distressed wheezes caught between vindication and fear of what would happen next. "Sit down, son," Elijah said quietly, helping Jamal back to his seat. Then, with movements so controlled they seemed almost mechanical, Elijah reached up and retrieved Jamal's backpack from the overhead compartment himself. No one, not even Veronica, made any move to stop him. As Jamal used his inhaler, the first-class cabin remained in stunned silence. The plane continued its descent, heading back to the airport where security personnel were already being summoned to Gate 37A. What would happen when they reached the ground? No one knew. But something fundamental had shifted in the relationship between father and son, between the Washingtons and the world they navigated so differently between power and justice. What would you have done in Elijah's position? Comment number 1, if you believe he should press charges against Veronica. Or number 2, if you think he should focus solely on getting medical attention for Jamal. Hit subscribe if you want to see more stories about standing up against discrimination. Now let's see what happens when the plane reaches the tarmac. The wheels of the Boeing 787 touched down with a slight bounce as the aircraft taxied toward the terminal. Tension inside the first-class cabin had reached an almost unbearable level. Jamal Washington's breathing had stabilized somewhat after using his inhaler, but the cut on his lip continued to bleed, and the red handprint on his cheek had begun to darken into what would clearly become a bruise. Captain Richard Sullivan's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've returned to the gate due to a security situation. Please remain seated until security personnel have boarded and addressed the matter." The plane came to a complete stop on the tarmac, while short of the actual gate. Through the windows, passengers could see several airport security vehicles approaching with flashing lights. Veronica Miller stood near the cockpit door, whispering urgently to the other flight attendants. Her face was flushed, but her expression showed more indignation than remorse. Occasionally, she would dart nervous glances toward the Washingtons. Elijah Washington sat perfectly still, his posture upright, hands folded in his lap, as if attending a routine business meeting. Only the intensity of his gaze fixed on the forward cabin door betrayed the gravity of his thoughts. Beside him, Jamal alternated between using his inhaler and dabbing at his bleeding lip with a napkin now stained crimson. The cabin door opened and 4 security officers entered the aircraft. They moved with the practiced efficiency of people accustomed to diffusing volatile situations. The lead officer, a stocky man with a buzz cut and a name badge reading Daniels, approached the front of the cabin, where Veronica immediately began speaking to him in hushed but animated tones. "That's him," she said, pointing directly at Jamal. Her voice rose enough for the entire cabin to hear. "He became aggressive when I asked him to stay seated. He threatened me, and I had to defend myself." The security officers moved toward the Washingtons' row hands, resting on their belts near their tasers. The passengers around them shifted uncomfortably, some reaching for phones to record what was happening. Sir Officer Daniels addressed Jamal. "We need you to gather your belongings and come with us." Before Jamal could respond, Elijah spoke in a voice that, while quiet, carried an unmistakable authority. "My son will not be going anywhere. He has been assaulted by a flight attendant, denied medical attention, and racially discriminated against throughout this flight. He requires medical attention for both his asthma and the injury to his face." Officer Daniel seemed taken aback by Elijah's composed confidence. "Sir, we have a report of a passenger becoming violent. I recorded everything." Sophia Chin interrupted from her seat, holding up her phone. The young man never threatened anyone. The flight attendant hit him when he tried to get his asthma medication after she repeatedly refused to help. Andre Coleman stood up despite the officer's presence. I witnessed the entire incident as well. This young man was assaulted while trying to access life-saving medication that he had been denied for no legitimate reason. Bradley Pierce snorted from across the aisle. The boy was disobeying crew instructions. Whatever happened after that is on him. The cabin erupted into multiple conversations as passengers took sides. Officer Daniels raised his hands for quiet, clearly reassessing the situation. "Everyone needs to calm down," he announced. "Sir," he addressed Elijah. "May I ask your name?" "Elijah Washington. This is my son, Jamal Washington." A flicker of recognition crossed the officer's face. Even in Boston, 3,000 dynol from Silicon Valley, Elijah Washington's name and face were well known. Quantum innovations had revolutionized artificial intelligence ethics and infrastructure, making Elijah one of the most influential tech leaders in the world. The power dynamic in the cabin shifted instantly. The security officers exchanged glances. Veronica's face paled as she seemed to realize for the first time exactly who she had been mistreating. "Mr. Washington." Officer Daniel said, his tone noticeably more respectful. "Perhaps we could discuss this situation more privately. There will be nothing private about this incident," Elijah stated firmly. "My 17-year-old son has been physically assaulted in full view of dozens of witnesses. He needs medical attention immediately, not an interrogation." As if on cue, Jamal experienced another constriction in his breathing. Using his inhaler again, with visible distress, the captain emerged from the cockpit, assessing the scene with evident alarm. Behind him appeared a man in an airline management uniform who quickly grasped the potential PR catastrophe unfolding. "Mr. Washington," the airline manager said, stepping forward with an outstretched hand that Elijah did not take. "I'm Douglas Porter, Customer Service Director. We deeply regret this unfortunate misunderstanding. If we could move this conversation to our premium lounge, my son needs medical attention." Elijah repeated, his voice hardening. And this was not a misunderstanding. It was assault, motivated by racial bias, which your airline facilitated through a pattern of discriminatory treatment that began the moment we boarded. Porter's professional smile faltered. "I assure you, our airline has zero tolerance for discrimination of any kind." "Yet here we are," Elijah interrupted. "My son bleeding and struggling to breathe after being struck by your employee." Sophia Chen stood up, her phone still recording. "I've already uploaded part of the video to social media. People are asking for updates." Indeed, several passengers had their phones out, some typing rapidly. The hashtag #JusticeForJamal was already beginning to trend locally as snippets of video made their way online. Captain Sullivan inserted himself into the conversation. "Mr. Washington, I understand your concerns, but we need to follow protocol. Your protocol." Elijah said, cutting him off, allowed a minor to be denied medical attention and then physically assaulted when he attempted to access it himself. "Your protocol is what we'll be discussing with our legal team and the FAA." The mention of federal aviation authorities caused visible discomfort among the airline staff. Porter whispered something to the captain, who nodded grimly. "We'll have medical personnel board immediately." Porter announced Illa will be removed from the flight pending a full investigation. "My son was assaulted because of his race," Elijah stated, clearly, ensuring every passenger could hear. "There will be no private resolution." As medical personnel were summoned to the aircraft, the standoff continued. Veronica was escorted off the plane by security protesting her innocence, even as multiple passengers called out, contradicting her version of events. The other passengers remained seated, many recording or live-streaming the unfolding situation. For Jamal, watching his father stand firm, not through angry outbursts, but through the calm, implacable insistence on justice, revealed a different kind of strength than he had previously recognized. The strategic patience his father had always preached wasn't about accepting injustice, but about knowing precisely when and how to fight most effectively. As EMTs finally boarded the plane and rushed to Jamal's side, father and son exchanged a look of mutual understanding. This wouldn't be swept under the rug or settled quietly. The Washington name carried power, and today that power would serve a purpose beyond business success. The story was already spreading beyond the confines of the aircraft, making its way across social media platforms and into news alerts. What had begun as a routine flight was transforming into a national conversation about privilege race and accountability. One that would continue to unfold in unexpected ways in the hours and days to come. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead as EMTs worked efficiently to stabilize Jamal Washington's condition on the aircraft. His oxygen levels had dropped dangerously low. The combination of stress, delayed medication access, and the physical confrontation had triggered a severe asthma attack. One paramedic placed an oxygen mask over Jamal's face, while another monitored his vitals. Blood pressure's elevated pulse rapid, the lead paramedic reported. "We need to transport him immediately." Through the oxygen mask, Jamal's eyes found his father's. Despite his medical distress, what concerned him most was the rare glimpse of fear he saw in Elijah Washington's typically composed expression. "I'm coming with him," Elijah stated. Not a request, but a declaration. As they prepared to move Jamal onto a stretcher, Elijah's mind involuntarily flashed back to another medical emergency, one with a far more devastating outcome. For years earlier, Ella Washington had complained of severe chest pain and shortness of breath. At the prestigious Boston Medical Center, staff had repeatedly dismissed her symptoms as anxiety or indigestion, despite her insistence that something was seriously wrong. Elijah had been overseas closing an acquisition when Ella called him, her voice strained with pain and frustration at not being taken seriously. "They're not listening to me, Eli," she had said. "They think I'm exaggerating." By the time Elijah had cut his trip short and returned to Boston, by the time medical staff finally ordered the tests that revealed the massive aortic dissection, it was too late. Layla Washington, brilliant neuroscientist, loving mother, and Elijah's partner in all things died while Elijah was still in the air somewhere over the Atlantic. The hospital's risk management team had later approached with settlement papers and non-disclosure agreements suggesting that perhaps Ella's symptoms had been atypical and difficult to diagnose, especially in certain populations. The subtext was clear. Black women's pain wasn't taken as seriously, wasn't believed, wasn't prioritized, even for the wife of a billionaire. Elijah had refused their settlement. Instead, he established the Layla Washington Foundation for Health Equity Funding Research and programs specifically addressing racial disparities in medical treatment. He also quietly ensured that several key hospital administrators found their careers stalled through strategic withdrawal of his considerable donations. Now, watching paramedics load his son onto a stretcher, Elijah made a silent vow that history would not repeat itself. Jamal would receive immediate, excellent care. There would be no dismissals, no delays, no subtle racism masquerading as medical protocol. Massachusetts General's closest one paramedic informed him as they began moving Jamal toward the aircraft door. "No," Elijah countered firmly. "Boston Memorial. Dr. James Chen is the pulmonologist on call today. He's expecting us." The paramedics exchanged surprised glances at Elijah's specific knowledge, but not at agreement. In the 4 minutes since the medical team had boarded the plane, Elijah had made 3 phone calls that ensured Boston's top pulmonary specialist would be waiting when they arrived. As they moved through the aisle, passengers watched in stunned silence. Sophia Chin continued recording, documenting both the medical response and the airline personnel's increasingly nervous attempts to manage the situation. Andre Coleman gathered Elijah and Jamal's belongings, volunteering to bring them to the hospital later. "This isn't over," Bradley Pierce called out as they passed his seat. The boy disobeyed flight instructions. Actions have consequences. Elijah didn't break stride or acknowledge the comment, but Andre Coleman paused. "So do words, Mr. Pierce," he said quietly. "So do words." The journey from airplane to ambulance felt both endless and lightning fast. Airport staff cleared paths, security escorted them through employee-only shortcuts, and airline representatives hovered anxiously nearby, all suddenly eager to provide assistance now that they understood who the Washingtons were. In the ambulance, Jamal's condition temporarily stabilized with proper medication and oxygen, though his vital signs remained concerning. The cut on his lip had been bandaged, but the bruise on his cheek was darkening visibly. Elijah held his son's hand, projecting calm confidence while internally mapping out the legal media and business responses that would follow this incident. When they arrived at Boston Memorial Hospital, Dr. James Chen was indeed waiting at the emergency entrance with a team of specialists. Unlike the dismissive treatment Illa had received, the medical response for Jamal was immediate, thorough, and respectful. Mr. Washington, doctor, and greeted Elijah with professional urgency. "We've prepared a treatment room. I've reviewed Jamal's medical history and have a pulmonary team standing by." As they wheeled Jamal into the treatment area, a nurse attempted to direct Elijah to the waiting room. "Sir, if you could wait, I'm staying with my son." Elijah stated in a tone that left no room for discussion. The hospital staff quickly adapted, bringing him a chair near Jamal's bed while they worked. Through it all, Jamal observed his father's methodical approach even in crisis. No shouting, no threats, just the calm deployment of influence resources and determination to ensure his son received proper care. It was the same strategic patience Elijah had always advocated. But now Jamal saw it not as avoidance of conflict, but as a different kind of power. Outside the hospital, news vans had already begun to gather. The video of Veronica slapping Jamal had gone viral, amplified by passengers' social media posts and picked up by major news outlets. #Justice for Jamal was trending nationally with commentary ranging from outrage to predictable attempts to justify the flight attendants' actions. Inside Jamal's hospital room, Dr. Chin delivered his assessment. The acute asthma attack has been controlled, but we're concerned about the delay in treatment and the physical and emotional stress factors. We'll need to keep him overnight for observation. Elijah nodded. "Whatever he needs, doctor." When the medical team stepped out briefly, Jamal removed his oxygen mask momentarily. "Dad," he said, his voice, "I'm sorry about the conference." Elijah looked at his son with surprise. "You have nothing to apologize for, Jamal. But your keynote speech is nowhere near as important as you." Elijah squeezed his son's hand. "The conference can wait." Jamal's phone, retrieved from his backpack, buzzed constantly with notifications as friends and classmates discovered what had happened. Elijah's phone similarly lit up with messages from board members, investors, and business associates. Some expressing concern, others worried about potential impacts on quantum innovation's stock price and public image. One message in particular caught Elijah's attention. An official statement from National Airways posted to their social media accounts. National Airways is aware of an incident involving a passenger and crew member on Flight 372. The crew member in question has been placed on administrative leave while we conduct a thorough investigation. We take all passenger concerns seriously and are committed to providing a safe, respectful environment for everyone who flies with us. The statement was corporate damage control at its most generic. No acknowledgement of assault, no mention of discrimination, no apology to the Washingtons. Jamal, reading the statement over his father's shoulder, shook his head in disgust. Administrative leave? She should be fired and arrested. "She will be," Elijah said with quiet certainty. "But first, we need you healthy and strong." As evening fell, Jamal's condition continued to improve under proper medical care. His room had been moved to a private suite in the hospital's VIP wing, with security posted outside at Elijah's request. The media presence outside the hospital had grown, with reporters seeking statements from hospital staff, the airline, and the Washington family. Tech conference organizers had reached out multiple times, offering to reschedule Elijah's keynote or arrange for a virtual presentation. The subtext was clear. They desperately wanted to avoid losing their highest profile speaker and the attention he would bring to their event. Through it all, something profound was shifting between father and son. In the quiet moments between medical checks and phone calls, they began a conversation that had been years in the making. "I always thought your way of handling racism was about accepting it," Jamal admitted. "About putting success ahead of dignity." Elijah considered this. "I never wanted you to accept injustice, Jamal. I wanted you to survive it, to accumulate the power needed to change it systematically, rather than fighting battles that might destroy you before you reached your potential." "Like Mom would have been destroyed if she'd fought back every time?" Jamal asked quietly. Elijah's eyes glistened. "Your mother fought brilliantly, just not always in ways others could see. She changed policies, mentored young scientists of color, redirected funding. She understood, as I've tried to help you understand, that sometimes the most effective resistance doesn't look like resistance at all until suddenly the whole system has been transformed from within." "But today, you didn't stay quiet," Jamal pointed out. "You didn't just strategically maneuver behind the scenes. Because sometimes Elijah acknowledged the moment demands a public stand. The wisdom is in knowing which approach serves justice best in each situation." As Jamal drifted into medication as assisted sleep, Elijah Washington remained vigilant by his bedside. Outside the hospital room, forces were gathering. Media attention intensifying, corporate responses being crafted, legal strategies forming on both sides. The video of the assault had been viewed millions of times, sparking heated debates across the country about race privilege, accountability, and justice. What had begun as a routine flight had become something far more significant, a flashpoint in America's ongoing struggle with its racial history and present. And at the center of it all was a father and son whose relationship was being reforged through fire, whose different approaches to navigating racism were finding unexpected common ground in the aftermath of a crisis that had nearly cost Jamal his life. Have you ever witnessed someone use their power to change an unjust system rather than just protect themselves? Comment number 1. If you believe wealth creates responsibility to fight for others. Press like if you've seen how quickly companies change their tune when faced with real accountability. The Washington family is about to show exactly how influence can be wielded for justice when they decide enough is enough. Morning light filtered through the hospital room blinds as Elijah Washington completed his 7th phone call in the past hour. Seated in an ergonomic chair that hospital staff had brought in overnight. He'd been orchestrating a strategic response while Jamal slept. "Charles, I need the board to understand something." Elijah spoke quietly but firmly to the chairman of Quantum Innovations. "This isn't a distraction from our business. This is now our business. Yes, I understand the earnings call is next week. No, I will not be issuing a conciliatory statement to calm the markets." Across the room, Jamal stirred awake. His breathing notably improved, though the bruise on his face had darkened considerably. He watched his father with newfound appreciation as Elijah continued his call. "The decision is made, Charles. Either the board backs me unanimously, or I'll call an emergency shareholder meeting. We both know how that will end." Elijah ended the call and turned to his son. "How are you feeling this morning, better?" Jamal replied, sitting up carefully. "What's happening out there?" Elijah handed him a tablet displaying multiple news sites, all featuring the incident. National Airways stock had dropped 11% in pre-market trading. The video of Veronica slapping Jamal had been viewed 23 million times overnight. "You've been busy," Jamal observed, noticing his father's meticulously organized notes and a series of completed calls marked on his digital schedule. "I've assembled a team," Elijah confirmed. "Sharon Taylor will be leading our legal response." Jamal's eyebrows rose. Sharon Taylor was the nation's most prominent civil rights attorney, famous for winning landmark discrimination cases against major corporations. "This isn't just about us anymore, is it?" Jamal asked. "It never was," Elijah replied. "But now we have the nation's attention, which means we have leverage to create real change." A soft knock at the door interrupted them. "Doctor." Chin entered with morning rounds accompanied by the hospital administrator, an unusual presence that signaled the high-profile nature of their patient. Jamal's recovery is progressing excellently. Dr. Chin reported after examination, his lung function has returned to near normal levels, though I'd recommend another 24 hours of observation given the severity of yesterday's attack. Whatever's necessary for his complete recovery. Elijah agreed. After the medical team departed, Elijah's phone rang again. He checked the screen and answered with deliberate formality. Mr. Reporter, I was wondering when National Airways would make this call. He put the phone on speaker so Jamal could hear. Mr. Washington Douglas Porter's voice carried the strained politeness of a man under extreme pressure. On behalf of National Airways, I want to express our deepest regrets about yesterday's unfortunate incident assault. Elijah corrected calmly. Let's use precise language. Your employee assaulted my 17-year-old son after denying him access to life-saving medication. A pause. Yes. Well, we take this matter very seriously. We'd like to offer. I'm not interested in what you'd like to offer. Elijah interrupted. Ms. Taylor, my attorney will be contacting your legal department within the hour with our requirements. Requirements? Porter's voice tightened. For addressing this systematically, not just individually, Veronica Miller's termination is merely the beginning. We'll require transparency about your discrimination complaint, history, mandatory training reforms, and an independent audit of your customer service practices with respect to passengers of color. Mr. Washington, surely we can come to a more private arrangement. The company is prepared to be extremely generous. This conversation is being recorded. Mr. Reporter Elijah noted, and your focus on privacy rather than accountability speaks volumes. After ending the call, Elijah turned to find Jamal watching him with a thoughtful expression. What? Elijah asked. I've never seen this side of you before, Jamal admitted. It's like you've been preparing for this moment my whole life. In some ways, I have been, Elijah acknowledged, but I hoped you'd never need to see it. Throughout the day, the hospital room became a command center. Sharon Taylor arrived with 2 associates setting up impromptu workstations. Elijah's executive assistant coordinated virtual meetings with Quantum Innovations executives and the PR team. Andre Coleman visited bringing the Washington's belongings from the plane and offering his witness statement to the legal team. Meanwhile, the opposing forces were mobilizing as well. National Airlines Flight Attendants Union issued a statement supporting Veronica Miller, claiming she had responded appropriately to a threatening situation. Right-wing media outlets began running segments questioning why Jamal had been aggressive and disobedient toward flight crew. Most troubling was Bradley Pierce's appearance on a national morning show where he described Jamal as intimidating and unstable, despite having witnessed the entire incident firsthand. That man is lying through his teeth, Jamal said, watching the interview with disgust. Yes, he is, Elijah agreed. And we'll address that too. Sharon Taylor's team had been conducting background research uncovering troubling patterns. Veronica Miller had a history of customer complaints that had never resulted in disciplinary action, many from passengers of color. Her social media accounts, though, recently scrubbed contained cached posts with racially insensitive content going back years. More damning was her connection to higher management. Her brother-in-law was National Airways Vice President of Operations, explaining her apparent immunity from consequences despite documented issues. By afternoon, Elijah faced mounting pressure from unexpected sources. Several major investors in Quantum Innovations had reached out with concerns about his distraction from core business. The tech conference organizers were practically begging for confirmation of his attendance offering to postpone the entire event if necessary. Your keynote was supposed to announce the new quantum computing initiative, his chief technology officer reminded him during a video call. The market's been anticipating this for months. Stock is down 4% just on rumors you might not appear. The announcement will happen, Elijah assured him, but on our terms, not theirs. After the call ended, Jamal addressed the elephant in the room. You're risking a lot for this, aren't you? Your company, your reputation, the partnerships you've built. Elijah considered the question carefully. What would all of that be worth if I failed to stand up, when my own son was assaulted for being black? What message would that send to you about what really matters? Before Jamal could respond, Sharon Taylor approached with a tablet displaying a confidential settlement offer from National Airways. 8 figures, comprehensive health care for Jamal, first-class travel for life, and a private apology from the CEO. They want this to go away quickly, she observed. And what do you think Elijah asked Jamal, surprising both his son and the attorney by seeking his input? Jamal studied the offer. This helps us, but what about the next black family they discriminate against? The ones without billionaire parents or viral videos? Elijah smiled. A rare, proud smile that transformed his serious demeanor. Exactly my thinking. Sharon, please inform them that we'll be declining their offer. We're proceeding with both the lawsuit and the FAA complaint. As evening approached, Jamal received an unexpected call from Sophia Chen, the passenger who had recorded the incident. They're trying to buy my silence, she told him. A National Airways representative just offered me lifetime platinum status and travel vouchers if I'll sign an NDA and delete the video. What did you tell them? Jamal asked. I told them I'd already backed up the video in multiple locations and that I believe in accountability more than free flights, she replied. Also, I started a support group for other passengers who witnessed the incident. Several are willing to testify if needed. After thanking her, Jamal shared the information with his father and the legal team, who noted it as further evidence of the airline's attempts to suppress the truth rather than address the underlying issues. As visiting hours ended, most of the impromptu staff departed, leaving father and son alone in the quieting hospital room. Outside, a small group of supporters had gathered holding signs with supportive messages and the now viral Justice for Jamal. Dad. Jamal said, as they watched the evening news coverage of their situation, when Mom died, did you fight the hospital like this? Elijah's expression softened at the mention of Ila. Not like this, he admitted. I fought them systematically behind the scenes. I established the foundation in her name, redirected funding, changed policies, but I often wonder if I should have been more public, if that might have saved other lives sooner. So this is for Mom too. Jamal realized everything I do is partly for her, Elijah acknowledged. But this is about creating a world where you don't have to choose between speaking up and staying safe, where power serves justice rather than just protecting itself. As night fell over Boston, the Washington family's private tragedy had transformed into a national inflection point. Corporate boardrooms, newsrooms, and living rooms across America were engaged in conversations about race accountability and the different rules that seemed to apply depending on the color of one's skin. For Elijah and Jamal, their personal crisis had evolved into something larger than themselves, a test case for whether wealth and influence could be tools for systemic change rather than just personal advantage. The fight was far from over, but for perhaps the first time, father and son were truly united in both purpose and approach. Their different perspectives strengthening rather than dividing them. Would you risk everything you'd built to stand up for what's right? Comment number 1. If you believe some principles are worth any cost, subscribe to see how the Washingtons transformed their personal tragedy into lasting change in the next part of this extraordinary journey. By morning, what had begun as a viral video had evolved into a national conversation. Every major news network featured panels discussing the incident, its implications, and the broader context of race in America. Split screens showed the hospital where Jamal recuperated National Airways headquarters, where executives huddled in crisis meetings, and the San Francisco Tech Conference now missing its headline speaker. Breaking news in the National Airways assault case announced a CNN anchor. The airline has placed flight attendant Veronica Miller on unpaid leave pending investigation, a change from yesterday's administrative leave with pay status. This comes after mounting public pressure and the Washington family's rejection of an initial settlement offer. In Jamal's hospital room, Dr. Chin completed his final examination before discharge. Your recovery has been remarkable, he noted, though I'd recommend avoiding stressful situations for at least a week. Elijah and Jamal exchanged knowing glances. Avoiding stress seemed impossible given what lay ahead. "Thank you, Doctor." Elijah said, "We appreciate your excellent care." As they prepared to leave, Sharon Taylor arrived with updates. "The narrative is shifting," she reported, showing them several news segments. They tried painting Jamal as aggressive initially, but that's falling apart as more witnesses come forward. Indeed, 3 more passengers had provided video evidence overnight, each capturing different angles of the incident that further contradicted Veronica Miller's claims. Andre Coleman had given a powerful interview describing the systematic discrimination he'd witnessed throughout the flight. "There's something else," Sharon added, handing Elijah a tablet displaying financial news. National Airways stock is down 17%. Their board called an emergency meeting for this afternoon. Outside the hospital, a carefully orchestrated departure awaited. Security personnel cleared a path through reporters and well-wishers. The Washingtons had declined all interview requests, allowing the evidence and witness accounts to speak for themselves, a strategic decision that left the public hungry for their perspective and prevented opponents from twisting their words. As they settled into the back of a sleek black SUV, Jamal scrolled through social media on his phone. "This is crazy," he murmured. "People are sharing their own stories of discrimination on flights with the hashtag, thousands of them." "The experience is unfortunately common," Elijah noted. "The difference is that now people are listening." The conversation around the incident had indeed expanded beyond the Washingtons. Black celebrities and business leaders shared similar experiences of mistreatment regardless of their status or wealth. Aviation experts discussed the troubling history of discriminatory treatment in air travel. Political commentators debated the effectiveness of corporate diversity training and accountability measures. Most significantly, National Airways' past was being excavated by investigative journalists who uncovered a pattern of discrimination complaints that had been settled quietly or dismissed. Former employees began speaking out about a corporate culture that protected certain staff regardless of their behavior. At the Washingtons' Boston home, Jamal retreated to his room to rest, while Elijah convened with his executive team and PR advisors. The tech conference was scheduled to begin the following day, and a decision about attendance could no longer be postponed. "The optics of you not appearing would be devastating for the company," argued his chief marketing officer. "The product announcement has been planned for months. The optics of me abandoning this fight for a business opportunity would be far worse," Elijah countered. "For my son, for our community, and ultimately for our company's values." After heated debate, a compromise emerged. Elijah would attend the conference with Jamal, but with completely revised content and messaging. The product announcement would proceed, but within a dramatically different context. Meanwhile, Jamal sat at his computer staring at a blank document. For the first time in his life, he felt the weight of public attention on his words. After several false starts, he began typing a statement for his social media accounts. "Yesterday, I experienced something that too many people face without cameras recording or influential parents to protect them. What happened to me wasn't exceptional. It was just exceptionally visible. I'm grateful for the support, but more importantly, I'm committed to ensuring this moment leads to real change for everyone who boards a plane expecting dignity and receives discrimination instead. This isn't about one flight attendant or one airline. It's about systems that protect some at the expense of others." He continued writing, finding his voice strengthening with each paragraph. By the time he finished, he had crafted a thoughtful statement that transcended the specific incident to address the broader issues at play. Before posting, he showed it to his father. Elijah read it carefully, then looked at his son with newfound respect. "This is powerful, Jamal. Measured, yet uncompromising. Your mother would be incredibly proud." With his father's approval, Jamal posted the statement. Within hours, it had been shared hundreds of thousands of times, endorsed by civil rights leaders, celebrities, and fellow students. What might have been dismissed as teenage anger had instead emerged as a clarion call for accountability that resonated across generations. By evening, National Airways' damage control efforts were crumbling. A former flight attendant who had worked with Veronica Miller appeared on MSNBC describing a pattern of discriminatory behavior that had been reported multiple times but never addressed. She produced emails showing that complaints had been systematically buried by management. It wasn't just Veronica the whistleblower, explained. It was the entire system that protected her and others like her. When passengers of colour complained, their concerns were classified as low priority or subjective perception issues in our internal tracking system. As these revelations spread, National Airways CEO finally appeared on camera looking haggarded and defensive. "We take these allegations very seriously." He stated a corporate platitude that rang hollow, given the mounting evidence to the contrary. "We are conducting a thorough review of our policies and procedures." The statement satisfied no one. Boycott calls intensified. Partner airlines began distancing themselves. Corporate clients publicly reconsidered their travel contracts. That night, as Elijah and Jamal prepared for their flight to San Francisco the following morning on a competitor airline, they watched the unfolding coverage together. "They still don't get it," Jamal observed. "They're treating this like a PR problem, not a human dignity problem." "Most organizations react that way initially," Elijah explained. "They try to manage perception rather than address reality, but sometimes the pressure becomes too great to maintain the facade." His words proved prophetic. Just before midnight, National Airways issued a new statement announcing Veronica Miller's termination. The resignation of the Vice President of Operations, her brother-in-law, and an independent review of the company's discrimination complaint procedures. It was a significant retreat from their initial position, but still focused on individual actors rather than systemic issues. The Washington's legal team released a brief response. "This represents a step toward accountability, but falls short of the systematic changes required. The litigation will proceed." As they packed for San Francisco, Jamal noticed his father including his music composition notebooks alongside the conference materials. "What are those for?" he asked, surprised. "I thought you might want them," Elijah replied. "I've been thinking about what you said regarding your passion for music." "But the conference is important," Elijah acknowledged. "But so is your voice in whatever form it takes." The following morning, as they boarded their flight to San Francisco, passengers and crew recognized them immediately. The flight attendants provided impeccable, respectful service. Fellow travelers offered supportive nods or words of encouragement. What struck Jamal most, however, was how his father had transformed overnight from a tech billionaire navigating racism through strategic accommodation to a public champion for accountability. The change wasn't in Elijah's values or beliefs. Those had always centered on justice, but in his willingness to deploy his power openly rather than behind the scenes. As the plane took off, father and son discussed their approach to the conference ahead. What had been planned as a straightforward business presentation would now serve as a platform for something far more significant. The tech world, and indeed the nation, waited to hear what Elijah Washington would say when he took the stage. Neither man could have predicted how their words would resonate, or how a violent moment on an airplane would catalyze changes far beyond one company or industry. But both understood that they had been given a rare opportunity to transform personal trauma into public good, and they were determined not to waste it. The San Francisco Convention Center hummed with anticipation. What should have been a routine tech conference had transformed into something entirely different, with media trucks lining the streets outside and security personnel stationed throughout the venue. The main auditorium, designed to hold 3,000 people, was filled to capacity an hour before Elijah Washington's scheduled keynote. Backstage, Elijah reviewed his completely revised presentation one final time. The original slides showcasing quantum innovation's breakthrough in ethical AI systems remained, but they now served a different narrative, one that connected technological advancement with human dignity and justice. Beside him, Jamal adjusted his time nervously. The decision to include him in the presentation had been made just hours earlier, after intense discussion about the potential impact versus the additional public scrutiny it would bring. "You don't have to do this," Elijah reminded his son. No one would blame you for staying backstage. Jamal shook his head. I need to do this not just for us, but for everyone watching who's ever been silenced. The bruise on Jamal's face had faded somewhat, but remained visible, a physical reminder of what had transpired on that flight. They had decided against concealing it with makeup, understanding its powerful visual testimony. 5 minutes, Mr. Washington, a conference coordinator, announced, clearly trying to maintain professional calm despite the unprecedented situation. Security around the event had been dramatically increased after several online threats targeted the Washingtons. The controversy had attracted extremist attention, with some commentators framing Elijah's stance as an attack on traditional American values rather than a demand for basic human dignity. As they prepared to take the stage, Elijah placed his hands on his son's shoulders. Whatever happens out there, I want you to know something. I've always been proud of you, Jamal, but never more than these past few days. You've shown courage that can't be taught. The moment was interrupted by Sharon Taylor arriving with breaking news. National Airways just announced the resignation of their CEO, effective immediately. The board statement cites failure of leadership in addressing systemic issues within company culture. Elijah nodded, absorbing this significant development. They're trying to get ahead of what's coming. Let's make sure they understand this is just the beginning. The lights dimmed in the auditorium and the conference moderator stepped to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, we are honored to present our keynote speaker, founder and CEO of Quantum Innovations, Elijah Washington. The applause that erupted as Elijah walked onto the stage was thunderous, becoming even louder when Jamal appeared beside him. The standing ovation continued for nearly 2 minutes, forcing Elijah to gesture for quiet before he could begin. Thank you, he said simply. I originally came here to talk about quantum computing and ethical AI. Those innovations still matter deeply to me and to the future we're building. But before we discuss technology, we need to address humanity. The auditorium fell silent as Elijah recounted what had happened on the flight, not with anger or sensationalism, but with the precise clarity that had made him a legendary business leader. He described the persistent pattern of discrimination, the denial of medical attention, and the assault connecting these events to broader patterns in American society. Many have asked why someone of my position and resources would pursue this matter so publicly, he continued. The answer is simple. Power confers responsibility. What good is influence if not used to ensure dignity for all? What good is wealth if it only purchases personal comfort while leaving systems of injustice intact? On the massive screens behind him, images appeared not of the incident itself, but of the thousands of similar stories shared under the Justice for Jamal hashtag. Stories from people of all backgrounds who had experienced discrimination and remained unheard. What happened to my son was not exceptional, Elijah emphasized. It was just exceptionally visible. And that visibility creates an obligation to seek change, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who boards a plane, enters a store, applies for a loan, or seeks medical care while carrying the burden of society's prejudices. He then pivoted to technology, drawing unexpected connections between ethical AI development and social justice. At Quantum Innovations, we've spent billions ensuring our systems don't perpetuate biases or discriminatory patterns. We recognize that technology built on flawed human assumptions simply automates injustice. Yet we've been slower to apply that same rigorous ethical framework to our human systems and institutions. For 40 minutes, Elijah wove together personal experience, business leadership, and a vision for institutional accountability that transcended political divisions. He announced a major new initiative. The Accountability Project, funded with $50 million from his personal fortune, would provide legal support to victims of discrimination while developing metrics and standards for corporate behavior. Today, I'm also announcing that Quantum Innovations will henceforth require all partner companies to undergo independent equity audits and maintain transparent discrimination complaint processes. This will be a condition of doing business with us, representing over $3 billion in annual contracts. The business implications of this announcement rippled through the audience, particularly among executives whose companies held contracts with Quantum. Elijah was effectively using his market position to force industry-wide changes in how companies handle discrimination. As he concluded his prepared remarks, Elijah turned to Jamal. And now, I'd like to introduce someone who has shown extraordinary courage and clarity through this ordeal. My son, Jamal Washington. The audience erupted again as Jamal stepped forward. Unlike his father's polished presentation style, Jamal spoke with the raw authenticity of youth, his voice occasionally breaking with emotion. For most of my life, I've struggled to understand my father's approach to racism. He began candidly. I mistook his strategic patience for acceptance, his careful navigation for surrender. What I've learned through this experience is that there are many ways to fight for justice, and we need all of them. Jamal described his perspective as a young black man coming of age in an America still grappling with its racial history and present. He spoke about the daily calculations of how to respond to microaggressions, when to speak up, when to document, when to channel anger into productive action. Then, in an unplanned moment that would later be described as the emotional center of the entire conference, Jamal asked for a keyboard to be brought on stage. "Music has always been my refuge and my voice," he explained, sitting at the instrument. "With my father's blessing, I'd like to share something I composed during my hospital stay." What followed was a 3-minute composition that began with discordant tension and evolved into a complex, harmonious resolution, a musical journey that reflected their experience without requiring words. The piece showcased extraordinary talent that Elijah had acknowledged, but perhaps never fully appreciated until this moment. When Jamal finished playing, the silence lasted several seconds before the audience rose in another standing ovation. Elijah, visibly moved, embraced his son center stage, a powerful image of intergenerational unity that would appear on front pages across the country. The following day, during the question and answer session that followed, a technology reporter asked about National Airways' latest response to the situation. Just minutes ago, she said the airline's board chairman issued a statement, apologizing unreservedly for the incident and announcing major policy changes, including mandatory bias training, transparent complaint tracking, and the creation of a customer advocacy office with independent oversight. "Those are positive steps," Elijah acknowledged. "But the true test will be sustained commitment rather than crisis response. Our legal team will be monitoring implementation closely." Another question came from a young black software engineer. "Mr. Washington, what would you say to those of us trying to navigate these systems without your level of resources and influence?" Elijah considered this thoughtfully. "First, I'd acknowledge that my position allows me options that many don't have. That's precisely why those with privilege must use it to change systems, not just protect themselves. Second, I'd encourage strategic alliance building. The witnesses who recorded the incident, the former employees who came forward, these acts of solidarity create collective power." As the session concluded, the conference organizer announced an unprecedented schedule change. The remaining presentations would be restructured around themes of accountability, inclusion, and ethical leadership in technology. Several major companies had already requested speaking slots to announce their own policy initiatives in response to the Washington family stand. Backstage after the presentation, Elijah and Jamal were met by Sharon Taylor with news that the airline CEO had personally reached out requesting a meeting. "He's offering a comprehensive settlement that includes everything we asked for, including the independent audit and structural changes," she reported, "plus a substantial contribution to the accountability project." They blinked, Jamal observed. They calculated, Elijah corrected. "The cost of fighting has become greater than the cost of changing." As they discussed next steps, a message arrived from Sophia Chen. The support group of flight witnesses had grown to include several National Airways employees who wanted to share information about other incidents and cover-ups. The machinery of accountability was now in motion, extending far beyond one flight attendant or one incident. What had begun as a personal trauma was evolving into a case study in how power, when properly deployed, could transform institutions rather than just extract individual concessions. For Jamal, watching his father navigate these complex negotiations with both principle and pragmatism provided a masterclass in effective advocacy. The same strategic patience he had once mistaken for passivity now revealed itself as a sophisticated approach to creating lasting change rather than momentary satisfaction. For Elijah, his son's moral clarity and artistic voice represented something he had almost overlooked in his focus on traditional measures of success. In Jamal's music and public statements, he recognized echoes of Layla's compassionate brilliance, a legacy continuing in unexpected and beautiful ways. As evening fell over San Francisco, their joint appearance had accomplished something neither could have achieved alone, bridging generational approaches to fighting injustice while demonstrating the power of unified purpose. The conversation they had started would continue long after the conference ended, rippling through corporate boardrooms, policy discussions, and dinner tables across America. 6 months later, Jamal Washington stood in the bustling quad of Berklee College of Music autumn leaves, swirling around his feet as he chatted with classmates between classes. His decision to pursue music composition rather than follow the expected path to Harvard had initially shocked many in his father's circle, but Elijah's unwavering support had silenced the critics. "Jamal, did you see the news?" called out his roommate Louise, jogging across the lawn with phone in hand. They just announced the verdict in the Miller case. Jamal took the phone, reading the breaking news alert. Former National Airways flight attendant Veronica Miller found guilty of misdemeanor assault and civil rights violations in Washington case. Sentencing scheduled for next month. The criminal charges had been just one thread in the complex tapestry of accountability that had unfolded since that day on the airplane. The Washington Foundation for Accountability and Equity, now fully operational with offices in 5 cities, had helped bring 27 similar cases against various airlines, resulting in industry-wide policy overhauls. "Your dad's going to be pleased," Luis commented. "It was never about punishing one person." Jamal replied, handing back the phone. "It was about changing the system that protected her and others like her." Later that afternoon, during his weekly video call with Elijah, Jamal shared news about his latest composition being selected for the Winter Showcase. Elijah, speaking from Quantum Innovations headquarters in Boston, beamed with genuine pride. "That's wonderful, son. I've already blocked the dates on my calendar." The relationship between father and son had transformed profoundly. Where once there had been tension over different approaches to navigating racism, there was now mutual respect for their complementary strengths. Elijah had come to appreciate Jamal's moral clarity and artistic voice, while Jamal had developed deeper understanding of his father's strategic approaches to systemic change. "Have you seen the latest compliance report from National Airways?" Elijah asked. I glanced at it. 94% implementation of the required changes right with independent verification, Elijah confirmed. The anonymous reporting system has already identified 3 other employees with patterns of discriminatory behavior. They're being addressed through the new progressive discipline protocol we helped design. Their settlement with National Airways had gone far beyond financial compensation. The Washington Foundation maintained oversight of the airline's transformation efforts with quarterly public reporting requirements and binding consequences for missed benchmarks. Most significantly, the agreement had established an industry-wide standard that other airlines were now adopting voluntarily to avoid similar scrutiny. Andre Coleman called yesterday. Elijah mentioned the executive inclusion initiative he's leading at his company has been remarkably effective. 10 major corporations have adopted the framework. Andre had become a key ally in their work, leveraging his corporate influence to advance equity initiatives from within existing power structures. Similarly, Sophia Chen had developed a technological solution for documenting and reporting discrimination incidents that was being implemented across multiple industries. "How's the music program expansion going?" Elijah inquired, referring to the foundation they'd established at Jamal's former high school to provide arts education for underserved students. "We just approved funding for 10 more schools," Jamal replied enthusiastically. The pilot program showed a 30% improvement in overall academic performance among participants. Art creates change beyond the canvas. This project had been Jamal's brainchild, using his experience and platform to ensure other young black artists had opportunities he'd almost missed while being pushed toward more practical careers. It represented the perfect synthesis of his father's strategic resource deployment and his own passionate belief in creative expression as a path to both personal and social transformation. As they concluded their call, Elijah mentioned an upcoming flight to New York for a United Nations panel on corporate accountability. National Airways actually reached out specifically to request my business, he noted with subtle irony. Are you going to fly with them? Jamal asked curiously. I am, Elijah confirmed. Their transformation deserves recognition. Accountability isn't just about punishment. It's about acknowledging positive change when it occurs. 2 weeks later, Elijah Washington boarded a National Airways flight to New York. The experience couldn't have been more different from that fateful day 6 months earlier. The crew was visibly diverse, the service impeccable and consistent for all passengers. The airline had implemented comprehensive training, revised hiring practices, and established clear accountability processes that were already being studied as industry best practices. As he settled into his first-class seat, a young black flight attendant approached. Mr. Washington, she said quietly, I just wanted to thank you personally. Because of the changes you fought for, I'm now part of the airline's mentorship program for underrepresented employees. You and Jamal made this industry better for all of us. Elijah nodded in acknowledgement, thinking about how a moment of injustice had catalyzed transformation far beyond what he could have engineered through his usual behind-the-scenes influence. Sometimes he realized public stands were necessary to create the pressure required for genuine change. When the flight landed at JFK, Elijah found himself reflecting on the true nature of power. For years, he had accumulated wealth and influence as protection against the racism he couldn't eliminate. He had taught Jamal to navigate systems rather than confront them directly. But what had happened on that tarmac 6 months ago had changed his understanding of how power could and should be used. The crisis had forced both father and son to reconsider their approaches. Elijah had embraced more direct confrontation of injustice, while Jamal had learned the value of strategic patience and systematic reform. Together, they had become more effective than either could have been alone. At his hotel that evening, Elijah received a video message from Jamal, a recording of his latest composition titled Tarmac. The piece beautifully captured their journey from confrontation through crisis to resolution, telling their story through music in ways words never could. As the final notes faded, Elijah felt a profound sense of peace. He had built quantum innovations to create technology that would change the world. But his most important contribution might ultimately be the example he and Jamal had set in turning personal trauma into collective progress. The incident that began with a slap on an airplane had rippled out were to touch countless lives. From airline employees empowered to report discrimination without fear, to passengers who now experienced more equitable treatment, to corporations implementing meaningful accountability measures rather than empty diversity statements. And most importantly, it had transformed a father and son's relationship, allowing each to see the other more fully and appreciate the different but complementary ways they approached the struggle for justice. Elijah's strategic patience and Jamal's moral clarity had combined to create something more powerful than either approach alone. What happened on that tarmac had frozen more than just a plane. It had created a moment of reckoning that forced uncomfortable but necessary conversations across America about who is protected, who is punished, and why. From that frozen moment had come movement progress and the kind of change that outlasts news cycles and trending hashtags. For Elijah and Jamal Washington, the journey had been both painfully personal and profoundly public. They had discovered that true power lay not in escaping the reality of racism through wealth or status, but in using privilege to dismantle the systems that perpetuate it note by note, policy by policy, heart by heart. What began with an assault had ended with transformation, and that both father and son now understood was the most powerful response to injustice. Have you ever witnessed a moment of injustice that led to unexpected positive change? Comment below with your experiences. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share to help others understand how privilege can be used to create systemic change rather than just personal comfort. Thank you for joining me for this powerful journey of transformation. And remember, true justice isn't just about what happens to us, but what we make happen for others. The Washington family's journey teaches us powerful lessons about confronting injustice. First, there's no single right way to fight discrimination. Elijah's strategic patience and Jamal's moral clarity both prove necessary for creating lasting change. Sometimes, systemic reform requires both approaches working in tandem. Second, privilege brings responsibility. Elijah's wealth and influence weren't just shields for personal protection, but tools that could dismantle barriers for others. True power lies not in escaping injustice personally, but in transforming systems that perpetuate it. Third, public accountability creates pressure that private influence alone cannot. While behind-the-scenes advocacy has value, some institutions only change when forced by public scrutiny and concrete consequences. The viral video catalyzed changes that might have taken years through traditional channels. Fourth, individual incidents reflect systemic patterns. What happened to Jamal wasn't exceptional. It was exceptionally visible. The thousands who shared similar stories under Justice for Jamal demonstrated how racism persists regardless of class or achievement. Finally, justice must be restorative, not just punitive. The Washingtons focused not merely on Veronica's punishment, but on transforming airline policies, creating reporting systems, and establishing industry standards that would protect future travelers. Their approach recognized that true justice creates safer spaces for everyone, turning moments of trauma into catalysts for collective progress. Have you ever witnessed discrimination that made you question whether to speak up or stay silent? Comment below about a time you had to choose between confrontation or strategic patience. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help others find it. Subscribe for more powerful narratives about overcoming injustice, and share this video with someone who might need courage to stand up against discrimination in their own life. Thank you for listening to this journey of transformation. Remember, in the fight for equality, we need both the wisdom to know when to wait and the courage to know when to act.